aspects of competitive cosplay. This is an interactive panel, so if you guys have questions as we go, please don't be afraid to ask. We want to make this as understandable and friendly to new and returning competitive cosplayers. So I'm Panin. I've been cosplaying for almost 20 years. I have done some international contests in Japan and the Netherlands, and then nationwide I've won about 50 to 60 awards. So I've been at this for a really long time, and I've also judged about 30 different contests, so I can tell you guys what to be ready for, what you should expect when you go into judging, and ways to impress the judges. So,
yeah. Hi, I'm Alpaca Ash, also Ashley, that's my name. I've been cosplaying since 2001. I didn't really start getting into more competitive cosplay until probably 2013. But since then, I also have done international competition. I was in Team USA for 2015 for WCS. Me and my partner, we won like best costume. We won third. I competed in recently TwitchCon a couple times now. I've done that twice now. So I actually just did that. So I've done a lot of kind of crazy competitions. I've been doing this a long time too. Cool. Always welcome to, if any time after the panel you guys have any questions for me, don't feel free to like find me online and shoot me messages. I'm always open to talking about stuff. So
cool. So of our attendees here today, is there anyone who hasn't done competitive cosplay before? Okay.
A lot of people.
Nice.
Yay.
So I thought first we'd talk about how it's different from like your everyday cosplaying through the hallways and on the convention floor. So with competitive cosplay, you get judged in two categories. First one's craftsmanship, the second one's performance. Here at Banzai, they let you can choose to do one or the other or both. If you have problems with like anxiety or stage fright, you don't have to do a stage portion. You can be judged only on the craftsmanship and the work that you put into your costume, which is really nice. And if you aren't so much into crafting your costumes, you can also be judged just on your performance and your ability to work the stage. It's really fun. The only award you wouldn't be eligible for if you pick one or the other is Best in Show, because that's a best overall award. Any questions so far? Cool. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, let's see. So so competitive is like, it's different from can be different from say what you might wear like a floor costume or just casual. Usually it's going to be more elaborate or have more techniques. But it can be anything. I've seen people, I've awarded people who made an amazing school uniform but had like crazy wings that unfolded with servos. So the cool thing is, it's not just, you don't have to go in and sew a crazy big ball gown. You don't have to make crazy armor. Like, it's a lot of the times it's like creativity and just different techniques are really highly rewarded. So and the other thing is, just to preface everything, is like, even if you're new or you've never done it before or you don't feel like your skills would ever like win anything, like I would say just go, if you're interested, give it a shot, because I've met some of my best friends just from doing cosplay competitions. It sounds super cheesy, but it's true. Like, I wouldn't have met Shannon if I hadn't have done WCS.
Yeah.
And so it's just one of those things is like, I highly recommend it. You don't have to win anything to have fun.
Right.
The green room's most of the fun anyway.
Yeah. And the green room is where you'll be while you're waiting to go on stage. Mm-hmm. You'll be with lots of your fellow competitors. Everybody's nervous. Everybody's, getting ready to go on stage. But it's a great time to meet people who are just as excited about cosplay. And if you already do cosplay, you know how much fun it is when someone asks you about your costume.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to ask that of others. If you see someone with a technique that you're like, that looks really cool, can you tell me about that? Like, it's a great place to meet people and learn a lot. So for craftsmanship, we're going to go down and talk about craftsmanship, and then we're going to talk about performance and kind of hit the points that we as judges usually look for that stand out as important to us. If you guys have questions, again, hit us up. One of the first biggest things, though, is cleanliness. And I don't just mean, is your costume not dirty? Because you can have a filthy costume and it will be so clean. Right?
That sounds like a contradiction. Can you explain to me what you mean?
Well, let's see. Last year we had one from the game Bloodborne. Ooh. And she had taken the time to like dye everything so it looked like it was dirty, but all of her clothing was as well made and cleanly made as it would be like if you bought it in a store. Like that's kind of what you're aiming for, is to like, it helps to even go to stores and see how they finish their not costumes, but how they finish their clothing, what kind of seams they're using, things like that. Because that's what we're looking for, is we want to make sure your costume's not fraying anywhere. We want to make sure like things are hemmed properly. If you have armor and props, that it's not just like an outside layer of paint, that you have some kind of finish or gloss or matte that's sealing your paint in. Basically like how well you're executing your techniques. If you did embroidery, is it, really tidy or is it sloppy? That's kind of what we mean with cleanliness. We brought a couple examples here
yes.
of what we mean with that. So these are, I haven't worn this one yet. Why don't you talk about yours, because I've been jabbering.
Oh, yeah. So this costume, I will be wearing this tomorrow for the contest, so you'll see the whole thing together. This is just a couple pieces, but this is the costume that I competed in at TwitchCon, and this one won best in needlework, because they do. That's the interesting thing. Every competition will have weird, different like rules. So every time you compete, definitely read the rules, because everybody's going to be different, unless you're like doing the like in Canada where they have the actual like guidelines. Like, Canada has like guidelines, not for every con, but so there's a lot of different things that people will be looking for, and usually judges roll in and out, so it's not going to be the same results every year too. But so this costume is Red Mage from Final Fantasy 14. And I know, especially like if I want people want to come up and see at some point. Do we want to do that after, maybe?
Yeah, if you guys want to see these up close afterwards.
Yeah.
I think we're just gonna like stand up and like hold them, so hopefully you can see them in the back.
So So afterwards, you guys can come up and see closer. But so something that's really important for sewing, especially, is so you have like outside fashion fabric, but also lining. So if you like, it's a really important, lining doesn't seem like it's a big deal, but that was something that was important for me, is making sure everything is lined and making sure I can get in and out of this costume easily in case I need to go to the bathroom. So those are like kind of the things I think about: movement, all important things when I was thinking about constructing this, and durability, because this was for a performance originally. This is for did a WCS costume skit with this costume, and so dynamic movement was a big important part of that. So actually the inside of the sleeves is actually spandex. So this is actually spandex in here.
Oh, smart.
Yeah, all my limbs had spandex on them, so my pants were lined in spandex too, because this is not a knit. This is a poly Dupioni, and it doesn't really. It has a stretch on like the bias, so the sleeves. This is, I know, getting into the weeds here, but I cut these a special way so they'd be more stretchy, but they're not. I didn't want to line it with something that wasn't going to stretch, and so the main portion is just this really cute. It's a really cute like crown pattern. I was like, I just want to do something fun, and I actually used the same thing on the hat. The hat has the same thing in it. Oh, I dropped a thing. That's fine. So and this costume is really fun because it has a lot of techniques. It's mainly sewing, but it has embroidery. So I did machine embroidery on the sleeves. It's all over this thing. But I also did 3D printing with the clasps. So I 3D modeled. This thing is such a floppy guy. So like these guys, these are all 3D modeled, and I actually molded and casted them. So there's 10 of these guys that snap on and off. The hat has 3D modeling. So this is just a nice combination of a bunch of different techniques, and you don't always have to. It's like if you can include different kinds of techniques, it's always a good idea if it makes sense. Like you don't want to just like throw in armor and something that's not supposed to have armor, but if you can be creative with your materials, that's always something that's like, that's really cool. It's really cool to see. I also threw in a lot of, this costume has a lot of leather pieces, like belts and stuff. And so I actually threw in, this black is actually leather as well. So I wanted to like incorporate different materials that would be in the costume in other places. So just thinking about fun things like that. Yeah.
All right. I did a very different jacket. We both brought jackets.
We have fun jackets.
This is for my JoJo costume that I'll probably be wearing tomorrow. But I wanted to show like applique. I wanted to show like some electronic stuff. It's also neon and crazy. But despite having all of this on the outside, you look on the inside and it's just a plain lining. I mean, you can also go crazy with your linings, but it just has to do with like how you're planning out when you put your stuff together, making sure that if you have a bunch of gear on your jacket or your pieces, that you get it all on before you line things, so we don't have to see like any sewing and stuff going through here. Also,
you're talking about like all the stuff on the outside. Yeah, you line last.
Yeah. And then with my electronic stuff, I still planned to have like a special pocket in here so that I can pull out, the space thing, so it does all that stuff.
Look at that guy.
But it doesn't, you don't see a bunch of wires sticking out. You don't see all the like inside stitching that I had to put down to make it do that. And that's kind of what cleanliness is. It's about hiding all of the messy bits of the costume that happen in construction. Anything else? Oh, talk about your prop.
I do have a prop.
I wasn't cleanliness in props. Too.
Yeah, I wasn't able to bring my sword just because it's kind of a pain to fly with. But yeah, so this guy is a little clamshell and it has a Moogle in it. Yay! So something that was important to me is that this also has lights in it on the side. It's a very small light, but it's in there. But this is actually lined. So I actually lined my prop. So seeing stuff like that, like you can line armor. Like I've seen, I've judged one Zelda who made her gauntlets, and she actually hand sculpted her gauntlets, and she actually lined them like with fabric, and it looked beautiful. So like that's something like if you can do things like that will just take it up to another level. Like I was trying to think what else. Like this is actually a 3D print, and that actually I can talk about cleanliness of 3D prints. 3D printing, I will say, as a judge for me, like one of the important things is getting the print lines out. Even this, there are subtle print lines you can see in like one little corner, and like, but otherwise, like it's pretty damn smooth. And I'm sorry I cussed. I'm sorry. But that was really important to me. I sanded this thing probably about 5 times on each side, just to get it as smooth as possible. I also did a vapor bath, but the vapor bath is when you use acetone to melt certain kinds of plastics. It still didn't get all of the print lines out. So I went in by hand, did a lot of that, did a lot of primer, did a lot of sanding, and it just takes time. It's not necessarily like it's more like difficult. You just more patience, and that's kind of like ironing for pressing seams and stuff for sewing. It's not necessarily like it's hard, but it's something that's important to do, and it just takes time. So giving yourself enough time. Cool. But yeah, if you want to meet my Moogle son, come meet my Moogle son. He's fun. He's actually he was actually 3D print as well, but he's cast out of silicone, so he's squishy and fuzzy. So he's super fun.
I'm really curious what the like naked Moogle silicone looks like.
Oh, I have pictures. If anybody wants to see it afterwards, I'll show. Okay. I have a step-by-step process of me gluing the hair to him. I should have brought the model.
Oh, it's okay.
I still have the 3D print of him, so he's super fun.
Do we have any questions about cleanliness before we move on? Cool. The next thing we want to talk about is difficulty, which Ash kind of talked about with how much work you put in, how much time you're taking to like sand out those fine details, things like that. Did you take the time to do something yourself that could have been bought or, printed or vinyl cut? Like even if you're 3D printing, are you taking the time to smooth it out and make it?
Yeah.
Like I don't want anyone to think that like 3D printing is less difficult than making something from foam or thermoplastics. They all have their different types of finish.
It's not. They're all hard.
They're all How many techniques are you using? You could be amazing at armor and fall short with sewing, or fantastic at embroidery but weak with props. We always prefer that you try, even if the skills aren't quite there, to show us as many as you can, but it's really good to refine your main ones as much as you can.
Yeah, and something that, so, like, if you're going into, say, like, a big competition and you're like, oh, I really want to win, like, doing a varied amount of techniques is good, but also you want to emphasize, like, kind of understand what you're really good at. So, like, I've been trying to get better at props. That's definitely one of the things I'm weaker in compared to sewing. I've been doing sewing longer. But that's the thing is, like, if you don't try them, you won't get better at them. But if your goal is just to, like for WCS, for instance, when I did it in 15, we focused on sewing because we were both me and my partner were really good at that. We had been doing it for years, and we're like, we're gonna just throw all the eggs into the sewing basket. But that's not the same. Like, you don't have to do that though. Like, that's the cool thing about competitions. You can do that, or you can try to do a varied amount of techniques. But I would recommend, if you're going to do something new that you've never done before, specifically for a competition, give yourself way more time than you think you need. Yes. Because I actually had super major setbacks on this prop, even right before TwitchCon, and it actually set me back. And I actually, like, I'm happy with it, but there's, like, things that I would have rather had happened with it if I had given myself more time.
Yeah.
So that's just my recommendation there is, like, definitely try new skills and supplement the skills you already know, but definitely, like, things will take much longer than you think.
Yeah. I would also add on to that, don't be afraid to start something over if you're not happy with it.
Yeah, that's a good one.
One of the things that I have frustrated myself with so many times is, like, I'll start a piece and I won't be happy with it, but I will still, like, keep going, and the more I keep going, the more I dislike it. When I should have just started over from the beginning and gone, I know this doesn't look the way I want it to, I'm gonna go back to the beginning.
Yeah. Actually, I mean, that's even something I did with for the first time I wore this costume. I had a different set. I had a sword and this prop here, which didn't have the Moogle in it at the time. And then I actually completely remade them because I was like, you know what? I can do this better, and I'll have a little more time. Little did I know I was gonna have a big setback later on, but so yeah. But yeah, I've done that too. It's like sewing, I feel like it's a little easier in some ways to redo something because you're like, oh, I can seam rip the thing and redo a seam. But there are times when I'm doing props and it's like you do something and maybe your paint job gets messed up. That is the worst. So, like, I know prop people who say the exact opposite about sewing, but
yeah, I would say it depends on the fabric because some of the things you rip and you cannot
leather
use again. Yeah,
leather and vinyl.
Yeah.
That's really scary.
Any questions about difficulty before we move on? Oh, you guys are so quiet.
Yeah.
All right. Next up is accuracy. Now, this is one that I would say make sure you're reading the rules of the convention you're entering, because some of them are very meticulous about accuracy to your references, and some of them like to see a little more creativity and individuality within your costumes. So just make sure that you are checking with the contest, make sure you know what they want so that you know what you want to enter.
Yeah.
I would say make sure you're bringing references, because the best way for a judge to know how accurate you are is if you have full color references of the character. If they don't exist, bring what does exist of the character. I've had some people do something out of manga that hasn't been animated or done in any sort of color format. Sometimes it is just your best guess, but bring a palette of what you decided those colors would be. If you have, like, a fan art, make sure that you have it from, like, as many angles as you can. I've seen a lot of people commission the original artist of some fan art pieces to do full turnarounds when they've done different, like, cosplay designs. Let's see. If you have made changes or embellishments to your costume, that's really cool. But do they make sense? Are they going to be historically accurate? Are they enhancing how real the costume feels? If it's off the reference, if you've changed something, be prepared to talk about why, because the judges will want to know. It may not negatively impact your score. It may be a positive. We just want to know why you made these choices.
Yeah. And that goes back to like the rules is like not every contest cares about accuracy. So say like contests that allow for like original characters like may not have accuracy as a point. So like may not be in the point system if they use point system. But World Cosplay Summit accuracy is a point that you can earn. But like TwitchCon, for instance, like you don't have to be accurate. They're more interested in like quality of the costume, the techniques you used, how good does the costume look, like the aesthetic. So yeah, there's so many different ways a contest can do that. And I know for instance for my team in 2015 for World Cosplay Summit, my final costume, because we did quick changes, my final costume had pretty decent reference for it, and it had color images because it was like a big dress that was from the manga. But my partner, the outfit she picked was just a black and white illustration, and she did her color choices herself. And you can still do that for World Cosplay Summit, for instance. You can still do stuff like that. It doesn't have to be fully color for you to be able to do it. And it looked great. It was, and a lot of people had done that costume before too. So there's no saying that you have to have like a full reference to be able to compete in something.
Yeah. One of the things we've talked about on the podcast that I host is that like you want to think about the world that your character comes from. How would it be built, considering where they're from? If they're from like an old-timey historical setting, look into those old-timey folk art patterns and see how they used to be made. If it's in a more modern setting, like what kind of accents and accessories would make sense. It can be a lot of fun to like get creative and think more about your character's world and get into the character building aspects. Yeah.
For instance, like for Red Mage, Final Fantasy XIV is like it's a fantasy world, but it's a very clean, beautiful fantasy world. So I knew, like if I was going to do Bloodborne, I would weather the crap out of that costume, put blood, dirt, all kinds of stuff on it. But I knew I wasn't going to do that for this costume. But I did add embellishments like adding just some stones and stuff like this, which isn't really in the art. This design, the design on the sleeve is in the art. It's on the 3D model, but the stones and stuff aren't. So I made sure that my stones matched the color that they were going to be sitting on, so it wasn't going to necessarily disrupt the design as much, but it was just going to add like a little bit of extra like emphasis on stage. So those are the kind of things that I like to do. But for like say TwitchCon, isn't as much of a thing. I like to be accurate, but then embellishing fun, creative ways. But that's just my personal preference. It's not saying it's the only way,
right?
For sure.
One fun thing that I have looked at when I'm like hunting down references is to see if there's like a stage play of an anime or something that's like in the same vein as your characters. Because like if you look at the stage plays for like Takarazuka and stuff like that, they're very like rhinestones and feathers and everything's elaborate and shiny. If you look at the stage play for like Naruto, they have like extra buckles and hardware and things that like show up on stage as texture, but they're not rhinestones because that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that doesn't
for
make
their world.
Sense. Yeah. So, yeah. And for World Cosplay Summit, my costume was, I put rhinestones all over it because like in the art it was very sparkly. You didn't necessarily see the stones in the art, but it was sparkly for some reason. And then my partner, she didn't do rhinestones at all because she was it was more of a punky streetwear. Rhinestones didn't make sense, so she more heavily emphasized. Oh my god, sequins. So she did shiny things, but sequins made more sense for what she was doing, and like more shiny like vinyl and stuff like that. So like thinking about those things is like really, it's super fun. I find it one of the most fun things about cosplay.
Cool. Any questions so far?
I think we have a question back here.
Yeah. Okay. So the question, just for our recording stuff, is if you have an original character, how do we judge for accuracy when there aren't necessarily references? I would say, like, here, I believe we still allow original characters. I would say commission an artist to make sure you have a rendition. Like, the judges need to know, even if it's a sketch that you've done yourself. I've had people bring in just like pencil drawings of what they envision the character to look like. What can really help is like doing almost like a Pinterest mood board of like what inspired you. So if your character is like medieval fantasy, like what parts of that inspired you? Do you have chainmail? Do you have leather work? Do you have like what status does your character have? Are they a peasant? Are they a noble lord? Are they a knight? Just giving us as many details so we know about this character and know what we should expect that the quality of their costume to be like. Does that make sense? Cool, thanks.
Yeah, and I would say, just to elaborate on that, is something that I would look for is varied techniques. Like, did you do, whatever techniques you use, did you do them really well? So that would be really important. And if you have multiple kinds of techniques, that's really helpful. Just to say, like, here is a portfolio of kind of the skills that I do. And then aesthetics is also really important. Is like, does it fit you well? Does it look good on you? Can you move in it? Because costumes are, movement is really important, and there's a lot of competitions that I've competed in and judged in where ability to move in the costume is really important, and actually you get points for it. If you're just in a big giant piece of armor that you can only stand in, then you're not, like, that's not necessarily like as impressive as somebody who made that big suit of armor, but they can actually like walk around in it and aren't dying.
That's one we probably should have mentioned with cleanliness is fit is making sure that your costume fits you well the way it's supposed to. Is it supposed to be baggy? Is it supposed to be really tight in places? Is it supposed to give your body like a specific shape or silhouette? Those are things we also look at. You can have something that's beautiful and gorgeously lined and then it doesn't fit you, or it's baggy, or it has like issues when you're wearing it, and that's definitely something we look at too.
I've definitely marked down points for somebody who had a beautiful gown and the torso, and it was historically accurate, but the bodice didn't fit her properly. It was baggy, and it was like specifically like a Tudor gown, and I know that those are supposed to be very form-fitting. It's very very and so like, but she did a lot of handwork and it was beautiful, but it's like that is a foundation. Same for armor, all that stuff. I think we had another question. Right.
Yes.
I have a question about does judges like to see what you've done step by step?
Yeah, that actually leads. So the question was, do judges like to see a step-by-step of your process? And that's absolutely. The next thing we wanted to talk about is actually presentation and how you show your costume to the judges.
Yeah, so that's that perfect segue. Thank you.
One more question.
We'll grab the next question. Oh, great.
Awesome. Yay!
Awesome. So presentation is next. This is how you show your costume to the judges. Having progress photos is absolutely vital. A good judge should be able to look at your costume and without progress photos know whether or not you've made it. They should know, like, in talking to you and how you describe your costume, be able to know whether or not you know your techniques and what you're talking about. But sometimes it's not always apparent. Sometimes your stuff is so clean that it's really hard to tell between that and something store-bought. So your progress pictures are what basically show, yes, I was the one that made this. Yes, I know what I'm talking about. And so we really appreciate having those. My usual preference, I guess, it depends on what convention you're at, whether or not they're going to give the judges time to look through your portfolios. If the rules say, stick to this many pages, please stick to that many pages, because they may not have time to look through it otherwise. And it would be really sad to put in work on your presentation that we don't get to go through. I usually like to keep things between 3 and 5 pages of work. I prefer not to have a lot of text because sometimes we have to look at things quickly.
Yeah.
So doing like little bullet points that say, this is the technique, this is what I did, like just really quick so that we can look at and go, oh, okay, that's really cool. Here's a close up. You know, that's really helpful. When we get like paragraphs about how it was made, I love that people have that much passion and put that much into it, but I don't always get a chance to read it.
Yeah.
So I would say be as concise as you can with those. Yeah, did you have a question?
Yeah, a couple of those. One, how many copies should one print out?
Uh-huh. So the questions are, how many copies should you have? And if you have the photos embedded with the text, will it count against you? I would say it depends on the contest. Some of them would like you to have a printout for every judge. A lot of times they'll announce their judges ahead of time so you can look at it and go, okay, there's this many judges, I should bring this many copies. Sometimes they'll tell you. Sometimes you have to reach out to the organizer and say, you know, how many should I bring? As for like text versus photos, I would say it wouldn't count against you per se, but I still wouldn't go over the 3 to 5 pages. I would say that's a per person thing. So 3 to 5 pages per person. And you can do front and back with that. I just, if we get too much of a novel, like we don't always get time to see everything. And I just hate to see work going to waste for that. Like at least here, we do a score on like 1 to 10 on your progress binders and references and everything. And as long as you have it all, you're still going to get full points. Everything else is just to help the judges understand.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've seen books that were really long, but if it's like you have a couple of big pictures per page, that's not as big of a deal. Like if you feel like you need to have them a little bigger, like, you know, if it's pretty quick to like flip through, I generally don't get a chance to read progress books as much. It's mostly just looking at the photos. And I would try to focus on the stuff that's like really, really special about your costume. So like, for this costume, I focused on embroidery, and I had specific embroidery techniques I had to do on special fabric, like the velvet. You have to embroider it a certain way, so I showed that in my progress book. Also showed, actually kind of related to that, for 3D printing, I would say you definitely want to show some of that because there is not necessarily like a stigma, but it's easy to, for certain things, it's easy to find files online to 3D print. And I'm not saying that you can't go find a 3D, if you can't model and you still want to 3D print, that's okay, but make sure you tell the judges, I didn't make this model, I found it online, but I did all the finish work. And for me, the finish work is one of the most important things about 3D printing. If you model it, that's extra bonus points, I feel like, because I 3D model, but I've been doing it for years, and I know there's a cost of entry for it, and I completely understand that as a judge. And 3D printing is not cheating. It is not. It is a lot of work.
Yeah. I honestly see 3D printing the same as buying a commercial pattern for your costume. It's already got the size and fit and everything you want, and but you're still doing all of the grunt work, trying to get it nice and smooth and exactly what you want.
But that's a really great way to put it, because if you pattern something yourself, that's like really great. And so if you 3D modeled the thing, that's really awesome too. So yeah, I think that's I'm going to start using that now. That's a really good way to put that. Yeah.
Any other questions on portfolio before we keep going? Cool. So other parts of presentation is making sure your costume is ready to be shown. Please, please, please press your costumes and make sure they're clean, like go over them with a lint roller, unless they're like filthy bloodborne stuff. Like make sure the costumes themselves are clean, free of stains, stuff like that. One of it hurts my heart to see like a really gorgeous costume that someone didn't iron before they came into judging, because I'm like, oh, it's so pretty, and I'm not gonna like mark you down on points for this, but please iron it. It shows like a cleaner, more professional look to your costumes before you bring them in.
So some judges might mark you down for non-pressed. It's it kind of depends on like what it is. But yeah, if it's and even just pressing your seams as you go for sewing specifically, it's just like sanding stuff for prop work is like, you got to do it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. This is, you got to do it.
And then making sure your appearance is tidy as well. So like, so your wig doesn't have strands going everywhere. So your makeup is nice and polished. Just making sure that you're presenting the best you that you can. It kind of feels like you're going in for a job interview.
Yeah.
Where you're just like, I want to present the best face I can for this. Rehearsing what you're going to say. One of the hardest parts is like you're timed, and a lot of times if you go off on tangents and things, you might not have a chance to talk about all the things that you worked really hard on. And we want to make sure that you hit all of the points important to you. And some judges will like, I know here we kind of like try to coach you if you forget something like, oh, you didn't talk about this, tell me about this piece. Not all judges will do that. So please be prepared. Please know what you're going to talk about. One of the things that I found really helpful for me when I do a presentation is I put together my portfolio in the order of stuff I want to talk about. So then when the judges are going through stuff, I'm like, okay, so they're on the first page, I talk about these bullet points. When they flip the page, I talk about these bullet points, you know, and that way I know not only are they getting use out of my portfolio, but I'm making sure that I hit all of those points. Anything you want to add for that?
Yeah. So one strategy you can also do is starting from top to bottom or bottom to top.
I like that one,
Yeah, and just talk about everything. Usually if I'm in a panic mode, that's what I do. It's just like I just default to that. A really good thing to do is if you have a lot going on in your costume and you have very little time to talk about, is prioritizing what you want to talk about. Think about what's the most unique thing about your costume and focus on those things first. And then if you have more time or judges have questions, then you can elaborate more on that. I had another really good point. What was it? Yeah, even if you're just like talking to yourself, talking about your costume, like you can just totally talk about it. Like don't be afraid to like be alone in your room and like talk about your costume. It's totally okay. I do it and it's totally fine. Actually, this is what I was going to say. It is totally like, I don't know of any judge so far, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if you want to have just like a little piece of paper that just has like a little bullet list, like you can totally do that. You can write down little notes if you want. Like I actually did that at TwitchCon. Oh, nice. Before I went in, Diana, my friend Diana, like, and I sat down, we wrote down all the techniques that I did, and we made sure to cover all of them while we were in presentation. And judges didn't care. Like no, like I would not care as a judge if you had notes. Like that's totally okay. It's not like you're, you know, doing a spelling bee or like a weird quiz at school. Yeah, some weird oral report where you have to memorize something. Like, no, that's totally okay because like it's whatever you can do to help present your costume the best you can, and that's totally fine. It's because as a judge, I want to hear about your costume. I want to hear what you love about it and what's great about it. So yeah,
we need to hurry.
Oh, we got to hurry. We have about almost 15 minutes left.
So a couple other things. Be on time for judging. Please, please, please don't be late.
Yeah.
That's one of the biggest things. And don't badmouth your costume. So
Never.
We only want to hear the good things. If there's something you forgot to do, if you didn't have time for, you wanted to do different, don't tell us. Just tell us the good things. We want to hear those. Like most of the time we wouldn't even notice the things that you are disappointed in. Moving on to performance. So how to have an effective performance, get those good performance scores. Biggest thing for me is, what is the story you're telling? If it takes more than a sentence for you to tell me what your skit's about, you probably need to rethink it and simplify it. It should be a really easy to follow story. Even if you're just doing a walk-on, you can put story elements into it. Character solves a quick problem. You know, things like that. It doesn't have to be complicated. In fact, especially if you're doing a series like people don't know as well, making that story as simple as possible is really important.
I would just totally agree with that. And one thing that I like to do is, if I'm doing a skit specifically, for me personally, I prefer to have a story that anybody can understand, even if you've never seen the series. And so what I like to do is I like to test my mom. I actually will show my mom my skit, like a video of my skit, and I'll be like, Mom, do you know what's going on? She'd be like, yeah. And I'm like, awesome. So, like, I always feel like I did a good job if my mom can understand. My mom's actually pretty cool, though. She knows a lot of nerdy stuff, but,
nice.
You know, Yeah, so and that actually goes right into practicing is like practice.
It helped with World Cosplay Summit a lot too with telling your stories because we had to have stories that can be told in several languages that could be understood even if the dialogue we're speaking isn't the same as isn't understandable. We should be able to still get the gist of the story through your movements and everything. We've got 5 minutes. Okay. Practice, as you said, practice all the time, practice. Not only does that give you a cleaner performance, it also gives you an idea of if you're going to have any malfunctions, you know what they are. Because if you're doing it for the first time on stage and something goes wrong, you may not know what to do. But if it happened in practice, then you're prepared. You can have backup plan like, oh, if I don't hit this cue, I'm going to move over here instead. Or if this part of my costume malfunctions, I'm going to pretend like it was meant to happen and do this instead.
Yes. Yeah. And don't stop.
Yes.
They lost their music for a while, and they found it again, but for a while they quite put their own music on it.
Oh,
yeah,
no.
I remember that.
Yeah, and if something like that happens, yeah.
Yeah.
And don't stop.
Please don't stop. Also, making sure your audio is clear. This is such a big one. Like, if we can't understand what is being said, it can be really hard to enjoy the performance. Sometimes we've had like crackly audio or like there wasn't a balance between music and spoken word. Have some other people test it. Make sure that they can hear everything. Make sure it's been through a couple sets of ears before it gets to the cosplay contest. Stage presence. Don't be afraid to take up space on stage. Like, use as much of the stage as you need to tell your story. Don't be afraid to hold poses. Whenever you're doing like a walk-on or something and you're standing still, it feels like forever, but it's really not, I promise.
Yeah, it's not.
And
take your time.
We want to like be able to take a minute and appreciate these costumes. Especially like your final pose is always the most important, whether it's a walk-on, whether it's a skit. Holding that last pose and making sure like that you get your applause that you deserve before you run off stage, so important. Give the audience time to react.
Yeah, thing to remember, like that, especially for like skits I've done, is like the most photos I got of my skit were always the last pose. So that is a thing to keep, like, what do I want pictures of is usually what I think of. Like, how do I want to look on stage?
And last thing is to be aware of your props and backgrounds and unwieldy costumes. Make sure you know you can move with bulky props. Make sure that you can walk around your sets without knocking them over. Make sure your sets are sturdy, that they don't get knocked over. Use sandbags or water bags or weights or something to keep your sets from falling over. Which kind of just goes in with the practice, but yeah, making sure your stuff is sturdy and you know how to move in it.
Yeah.
That's the last thing we had. Do you guys have any questions real quick before we wrap up?
I'm glad we did questions while we went.
Yeah.
That gave you guys chances.
Very cool. If you guys want to come up and see some of the costumes that we brought, you're welcome to. But otherwise, thank you guys so much for coming.
Thank you guys.
Thank you for staying the whole time.
Yay!
And I hope it was informative.